shadow over Harper Falls. The Disappearance. Harper Falls, a small town in the state of Maine, surrounded by dense pine forests and quiet lakes. Nothing ever really happened here until that night. On October 10th, 2024, 28-year-old Julia Clark returned to town. She had left as a teenager after a family tragedy, swearing she would never come back. But news that her younger brother Tom had gone missing forced her to cross 1,000 miles and step once again onto the familiar streets. That evening, as the sun touched the tops of the trees, Julia came to the house where she and her brother had grown up. The place stood empty, curtains torn, dust on the porch. Their neighbor, Mrs. Harper, an elderly woman with an ever-watchful gaze, said only one thing. Tom disappeared just like your father did all those years ago. And it has started again. Julia didn't understand what she meant, but that night, she couldn't sleep. From the woods outside her window came a strange, rhythmic sound like someone knocking on wood. She stepped onto the porch, and in the distance, beneath the old streetlight, she noticed a figure in a black cloak. The figure didn't move. It simply stood there, watching her. When Julia took a step forward, the streetlight flickered and the person vanished, as if dissolved into the air. The house that waited. The next morning, Julia woke to a pale, cold light seeping through the cracked blinds. The air in the old house was heavy, smelling faintly of damp wood and something metallic like rust or blood. She pushed the thought away. She hadn't stayed here since she was 16. The place looked exactly as it had the night she left. The same faded wallpaper peeling in the corners, the same crooked picture frames on the wall, the same creak in the third stair leading to the second floor. But now, everything seemed frozen, as though the house had been holding its breath for years, waiting for her to return. She walked into the kitchen. A thin layer of dust covered the table, except for a single clean circle in the center, the size of a mug. Julia froze. No one had been here for weeks, according to the police. So why did it look like someone had just been drinking coffee here? She opened the back door, which led out toward the yard and the forest. The October air was sharp and cold, and the morning fog clung low to the ground, swallowing the edges of the woods. Somewhere in that mist, something moved, slow and deliberate. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, startling her. It was an unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. Julia, the voice was male, low, and trembling. Don't go near the woods. It's already watching you. Her heart pounded. Who is this? She demanded. But all she heard was a click, followed by the faint sound of that same rhythmic knocking she had heard the night before. She turned toward the forest. The fog shifted, and for just a second, she swore she saw a tall, dark silhouette between the trees. And then it was gone. The silence that followed felt like the whole town was holding its breath. The first clue. Julia spent the rest of the morning pacing the house, unable to shake the unease curling in her stomach. Every time she passed the kitchen, her eyes were drawn back to that dustless circle on the table. She kept telling herself it could have been left there weeks ago, but deep down, she didn't believe it. By noon, she decided to head into town. Harper Falls had one main street, lined with a diner, a post office, a gas station, and a few boarded-up shops. When she stepped inside Harper's diner, the warm smell of coffee and frying bacon wrapped around her like a blanket, but the way people looked at her was far from welcoming. Conversations dropped to whispers, eyes followed her, and some didn't bother to hide their suspicion. The waitress, a tall woman in her 50s named Marlene, poured her coffee without being asked. "You're Clark's girl," she said flatly. "We heard you were back." Julia tried to sound casual. "I'm looking for my brother, Tom. You know anything?" Marlene's hand froze over the coffee pot. "Best not to ask too many questions about the woods," she muttered, then walked away without another word. Julia was about to call her back when she noticed something taped to the wall by the register, a faded missing person flyer. It was Tom's face, but the date at the bottom stopped her cold. It said October 10th, 1998. She tore the flyer down and turned it over. On the back, in black marker, someone had scrawled, "The woods keep what they're owed." Julia's breath caught in her throat. That date, 1998, was the year their father vanished. And now Tom was gone on the exact same day, 26 years later. Her hands trembling, she stepped outside into the chill air. The sky had darkened with heavy clouds, though it was only midday. As she walked toward her car, she saw something on the windshield, a folded scrap of paper. Inside, in jagged handwriting, it read, "He's not lost. He's been taken. Tonight. Old Mill." Julia looked up toward the end of Main Street, where the skeletal frame of the abandoned Harper Falls paper mill rose against the horizon like a blackened scar. And for the first time since she arrived, she felt the cold certainty. Someone wanted her to come there. The mill at dusk. By the time Julia reached the outskirts of town, the sun was slipping lower, bleeding a deep orange into the clouds. The abandoned Harper Falls paper mill loomed ahead, its rusted smokestacks jutting into the sky like broken spears. Windows were shattered, metal siding peeled away in strips, and the massive front doors hung crooked on their hinges. She parked the car 100 feet away, leaving the engine off to avoid drawing attention. The air here felt heavier, thicker, as if the whole place was steeped in something old and unpleasant. Even from the outside, she could hear faint creaks and groans from the structure, though there was no wind. Pushing the warped doors open, she stepped inside. The smell hit her first, a mix of wet rot, rust, and something faintly chemical. The cavernous interior was dim, the fading light filtering through holes in the roof, scattering long shadows across the cracked concrete floor. Her footsteps echoed. She passed rows of rusted machinery, conveyor belts thick with dust, and walls covered in graffiti. Most of it was meaningless scrawls, but one phrase appeared again and again in jagged black paint. The debt must be paid. The deeper she went, the colder it became, as if she were descending into a cave. Somewhere above, a loose sheet of metal clanged sharply, and Julia froze, her pulse racing. She strained to listen, then heard it, that same rhythmic knocking. It was faint but steady, coming from the far end of the mill. She moved toward it slowly, weaving through piles of debris. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she jumped. Pulling it out, she saw a new text from the same unknown number that had called her earlier. "Don't look behind you." Her blood turned to ice. She stood perfectly still, resisting the urge, but every nerve in her body screamed to turn around. The knocking stopped. Slowly, she took one more step, and something crunched under her shoe. Looking down, she saw a Polaroid photograph lying face up. It was her brother, Tom, bound to a chair, eyes wide with terror. Behind him, in the shadows, was a tall, hooded figure. The image wasn't old. It looked like it had been taken just hours ago. From somewhere above, a deep, deliberate voice echoed down through the rafters. "Julia, you came." The voice in the shadows. Julia's breath caught in her throat. The voice wasn't loud, but it carried through the mill like it belonged to the building itself. She looked up toward the rafters, scanning the darkness between the rusted beams, but saw nothing. Her grip tightened around the phone in her hand. "Where's my brother?" she called out, her voice steadier than she felt. The reply came after a long pause, low and deliberate. "He's where your father went, and where you will go if you stay." The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, above, behind, even from the dark stairwell that led to the second floor. Julia's instinct screamed at her to run, but something stronger kept her rooted, the Polaroid of Tom, still clutched in her fingers. She forced her legs to move, heading toward the stairwell. Every step made the air colder. A thin layer of dust coated the stairs, yet here and there she noticed fresh footprints, large ones, heavy, leading upward. At the top, the floorboards groaned under her weight. The corridor stretched into darkness, lit only by faint strips of dying sunlight leaking through gaps in the wall. At the far end, she could just make out a door, slightly ajar, a pale light spilling from the gap. As she approached, the rhythmic knocking started again, closer this time. "Knock, knock, knock." She pushed the door open and froze. The room was almost empty, except for an old wooden chair in the center. A rope dangled from the ceiling above it, tied in a loop. The chair's legs were worn smooth, as if someone had sat there for hours, maybe days. And carved deep into the seat, in jagged letters, was a single word: "Return." Before she could move, the door slammed shut behind her. The pale light flickered, and in the reflection of the dirty window, she saw it. A tall figure, draped in a hooded cloak, standing right behind her. "You should never have come back, Julia," the voice whispered, closer now, heavy with something that felt almost like hunger. The escape attempt. Julia's heart slammed against her ribs. She didn't turn. Every instinct told her that if she faced the figure too soon, she might not get the chance to move at all. The air in the room seemed to thicken, the faint light bending strangely around the hooded silhouette in the window's reflection. She could see no face beneath the hood, only darkness. Her voice came out low, almost a growl. "Where is Tom?" The figure didn't answer. Instead, it took one slow step toward her. The floorboards groaned under its weight, and a deep, cold pressure wrapped around her chest, like the room itself was closing in. Julia moved fast. Spinning to the side, she grabbed the chair in the center of the room and shoved it hard toward the figure. The chair hit with a crash, but instead of stumbling, the figure dissolved, breaking apart into a cloud of black ash that swirled in the air before reforming by the door. Her stomach turned. This thing wasn't moving like a person. She darted for the window, shoving it open with both hands. Cold October air flooded in, carrying the distant smell of pine and something sharper, chemical, maybe from the river behind the mill. She was halfway through when a hand, ice cold and impossibly strong, clamped around her ankle. She kicked hard, her heel connecting with something solid, and the grip loosened. She dropped down to the ground outside, hitting the dirt hard, her palms scraping against broken glass scattered in the weeds. For a second, she lay there, breathing hard, and then she heard it. That slow, deliberate knocking. But now it was coming from the tree line beyond the mill. Through the fog, a second figure stood between the pines, holding something small and square in its hand. It lifted the object just enough for Julia to see a Polaroid camera. The flash went off. She blinked against the burst of light, and when her vision cleared, the figure was gone. Somewhere behind her, inside the mill, the deep voice echoed again, not angry but almost amused. "You can't run from a debt, Julia." The ledger. Julia didn't stop running until the mill was a dark shape far behind her, its broken smokestacks vanishing into the fog. She didn't remember crossing the overgrown tracks or cutting through the trees. Only the pounding in her chest and the desperate need to put distance between herself and that voice. By the time she reached her car, her hands were trembling so badly she dropped the keys twice. She locked the doors, started the engine, and sat there for a moment, forcing her breathing to slow. That's when she noticed something on the passenger seat. It hadn't been there when she left for the mill. A leather-bound ledger, cracked with age, lay neatly in the middle of the seat. Her name, Julia Clark, was written across the cover in heavy black ink. She hesitated before opening it. Inside, the yellowed pages were lined with names, each followed by 2 dates. The first date seemed to be the person's birth. The second was the exact day they went missing. Her father's name was there. October 10th, 1998. Her brother's name. October 10th, 2024. Julia flipped further. Near the back, she found a section of names written more recently. Some she recognized as townspeople, others she didn't. Every single one had the same second date, October 10th of various years. And then she saw her own name again, but the second date was blank. Her grip tightened on the ledger, her pulse pounding in her ears. She took the book straight to the Harper Falls Historical Society, a small brick building at the edge of Main Street. Inside, the air was dusty and still, smelling faintly of old paper. An elderly man with a shock of white hair looked up from behind the counter. "Can I help you?" he asked, adjusting his glasses. Julia slid the ledger onto the counter. "I need to know what this is." The man's eyes scanned the cover, and his face drained of color. He looked at her like she just placed a live snake in front of him. "Where did you get this?" His voice was barely above a whisper. Julia didn't answer. The man swallowed hard, glancing toward the front door before leaning in. "That book shouldn't exist anymore. They burned the last one 26 years ago, the night your father disappeared." He pushed it back toward her. You need to leave Harper Falls, Miss Clark, tonight. Because if your name's in here, the woods are already coming for you. The pact. Julia gripped the ledger, her knuckles white. What do you mean, the woods are coming for me? The old man, his name tag read Walter Price, glanced toward the window as if expecting someone to be watching. You're not from here anymore. You don't remember what this town was built on. I grew up here, Julia said sharply. I remember enough. Walter shook his head. No, you remember what they let you remember. He motioned for her to follow him deeper into the Historical Society's back room, where tall shelves sagged under the weight of dusty archives. He pulled out a narrow file box, unlocked it, and withdrew a brittle stack of newspaper clippings, all yellowed with age. The first headline read, 3 Missing in Harper Falls, October 10th, 1924. Another, dated 1950. Local mill worker vanishes on anniversary of earlier disappearances. And then 1972, 1998. Each year the same pattern, October 10th. Always someone local. Always no body found. Walter spread the clippings out like a grim mosaic. 100 years ago, this land wasn't just forest. It belonged to a man named Elias Harrow. He built the first mill, and the town grew around it. But the truth is, Harrow struck a bargain, not with another man, but with the thing that lived in the forest. Julia stared at him. You expect me to believe. I expect you to understand that Harper Falls shouldn't exist, Walter interrupted, his voice hard. The mill prospered, the town survived the Depression. We never starved during the bad winters, because every 26 years, the woods took someone in exchange. Harrow agreed to the terms. The town pretends not to know, but the dates are in the ledger. Julia felt the weight of the book in her hands. And now it's Tom's turn. Walter's gaze softened, but only slightly. If your brother's still alive, he's in the woods. And after sundown, that place belongs to it. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small, tarnished brass compass. The glass face was cracked, but the needle spun slowly before settling on a bearing. This will lead you where the missing go, Walter said. But if you follow it, you might not come back. Julia took it. She didn't have a choice. When she stepped outside, the clouds had thickened, swallowing what little daylight was left. Somewhere beyond the town, past the black silhouette of the mill, the forest waited, silent, watching. And in her pocket, the compass began to turn. Into the woods. By the time Julia reached the edge of the forest, night had fallen in full. The clouds hung low, choking the moonlight, so the trees stood as black silhouettes against a sky the color of lead. The air was unnaturally still. Even the crickets had gone silent. She pulled Walter's compass from her pocket. The cracked glass caught the faint glow from her phone screen, and the needle pointed straight ahead, deeper into the darkness. Every instinct told her to turn back, but she thought of Tom, of the terror in his eyes in that Polaroid, and stepped forward. The first few yards were nothing but pine needles underfoot, the faint scent of sap and damp earth. But the deeper she went, the colder it became. Her breath fogged in the air, and a fine mist began to cling to her hair and clothes. The trees grew thicker, their branches twisting together like skeletal fingers, blocking what little light remained. And then she heard it. Knock, knock, knock. It came from somewhere ahead, steady and slow, as if whoever or whatever was making it wasn't a hurry. She followed, her flashlight cutting a narrow path through the dark, the beam catching fragments of movement, a shadow slipping between trees, a branch swaying though there was no wind. The compass needle quivered and began to spin, then stopped abruptly, pointing toward a narrow gap between 2 massive pines. Beyond them, she saw a faint, flickering light. She approached cautiously. The light came from an old lantern hanging from a tree limb, its glass cracked, the flame inside guttering as if fighting to stay alive. Beneath it lay another Polaroid, this one of her father, younger than she remembered him, standing in the very same spot where she now stood. Behind him, in the blurry background, was that same hooded figure. Her throat tightened. She reached for the photo, and the forest reacted. The knocking grew louder, now joined by a deep, low hum that seemed to rise from the ground itself. The trees creaked, as if straining under some invisible force. Somewhere close, a voice whispered her name, so close to her ear she spun around, but no one was there. The compass needle jerked sharply to the left. She followed it, breaking through a tangle of underbrush, until she stumbled into a small clearing. At its center stood an ancient stone altar, slick with moss and rain. Around it, half buried in the soil, were dozens of weathered wooden chairs, each with a name carved into the seat. One of them read, Thomas Clark. The chairs. Julia's breath came in sharp, shallow bursts. The name carved into the chair in front of her looked fresh, the wood lighter and cleaner than the weathered ones around it. She ran her fingers over the letters, the grooves rough against her skin. Thomas Clark. Her brother had been here. She took a step back, scanning the clearing. The other chairs formed a loose circle around the stone altar, some leaning at odd angles, as if someone had sat in them recently. She moved closer to one at the far side, brushing away moss from its seat. Another name emerged, David Harrow, the founder's family name. Then she noticed something that froze her blood. In the dim light, it became clear the chairs weren't empty. Faint outlines of figures sat slumped in several of them, so still they seemed part of the forest itself. Julia's first thought was that they were statues, carved from wood, but then one of them moved. A slow turn of the head. Eyes, pale, clouded, almost glowing in the darkness, locked onto hers. The humming in the ground intensified, vibrating up through her boots into her bones. One by one, the figures began to straighten in their seats. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, like marionettes pulled by unseen strings. Julia, the voice came from behind her, close enough that her hair stirred from the breath. She spun, and there he was, the hooded figure, towering over her, the darkness beneath the hood swallowing his face entirely. "You found the debtors," he said, gesturing to the circle of chairs. "Each one promised. Each one paid. Your father among them. Your brother waits to join them." Julia backed toward the altar, her hands groping for anything she could use as a weapon. "I'm taking Tom back." The hood tilted slightly, as though amused. "No one leaves unless another takes their place." The pale-eyed figures began to rise from their seats, their limbs moving stiffly, surrounding her in a tightening circle. The air was so cold now that her breath came in plumes, her fingers going numb. Her pulse thundered in her ears, but her mind sharpened. If the rule was 1 for 1, maybe there was a way to bend it, or break it. But first, she'd have to survive this night. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the circle, she thought she heard it, a faint, desperate voice. "Julia, help me." It was Tom, the bargain's edge. The sound of Tom's voice sliced through the cold like a flare in the dark. Julia spun toward the trees beyond the circle of chairs, scanning the shadows for any sign of him. The compass in her pocket began to vibrate faintly, the needle twitching toward the source of the call. The hooded figure didn't move to stop her. Instead, he stood perfectly still, hands hidden in the folds of his cloak. "You can go to him," he said in that deep, measured tone. "But know this, once you leave this place, the choice must be made. One stays, one goes. The forest always takes its due." Julia's breath steamed in the frigid air. The pale-eyed figures that had risen from their chairs seemed to hesitate, their heads tilted toward the sound of her brother's voice, as if it called to them too. She darted toward the gap in the circle, heart pounding. The moment she crossed it, the humming beneath her feet shifted, becoming faster, more urgent. The forest around her seemed to breathe, branches swaying in a wind she couldn't feel, shadows sliding along the ground in ways that didn't match her flashlight beam. "Julia!" The voice was louder now, closer, but threaded with panic. She broke through a wall of undergrowth and stumbled into a smaller clearing. There he was, Tom, sitting on the ground, hands bound, a strip of duct tape over his mouth. His eyes widened with relief when he saw her, but that relief flickered into something else, fear. She dropped to her knees, ripping the tape away. "Tom, it's me." "Behind you," he gasped. She turned and froze. The hooded figure was there again, though she hadn't heard a single footstep. Between them now stood the altar from the other clearing, though impossibly it had followed them, or the forest had rearranged itself to keep it near. "Choose," the figure said, his voice curling through the cold like smoke. One walks away. The other stays in the circle. Forever. Julia's mind raced. If she refused, would the woods simply take them both? If she offered herself, would Tom truly be freed? And if there was a way to cheat the bargain, she had to find it before the forest decided for her. The trees shivered again, the humming deepening to a bone-rattling thrum. Time was running out, breaking the circle. Julia's breath came fast, every muscle in her body coiled tight. The hooded figure waited without moving, as if he already knew what her answer would be. Tom sat frozen behind her, his wrists bound, his face pale in the cold light that seemed to come from nowhere. Her eyes flicked to the altar between them. Something about it felt wrong. The stone wasn't just weathered, it pulsed faintly, like it was alive. She stepped toward it, testing the figure's reaction. He didn't move, but she felt the air thicken, pressing against her like invisible hands. "One stays," he repeated. "One goes. That is the law." Julia's voice came low but steady. "What happens if no one stays?" The figure tilted his hooded head slightly, and though she couldn't see his face, she swore she felt a smile. "Then the forest takes both. And more." That was the answer she needed. Not the words themselves, but the fact that the rules could be spoken aloud. If they could be spoken, maybe they could be bent. She knelt by Tom, sawing at the rope with a jagged shard of rock she'd grabbed from the ground. "Why I tell you to run, you run," she whispered. "Julia, don't argue. Just do it." The rope snapped. Before the hooded figure could react, Julia lunged forward, shoving the altar with all her weight. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the moss-slick stone tilted, the hum in the ground spiking into a shrill, piercing note. The air around them convulsed. The pale-eyed figures in the clearing shrieked, not in human voices, but in something raw and ancient. The hooded figure staggered backward a single step, the first movement that felt unsure. "Run!" Julia screamed. She and Tom bolted into the trees, branches clawing at their faces, the forest roaring behind them. But the ground itself seemed to shift under their feet, the path twisting, trees closing in. No matter which way they turned, the same shapes kept reappearing in the darkness. The circle of chairs, the altar, and the hooded figure waiting in the center. The forest wasn't letting them leave. And then Julia realized the truth with a cold rush of dread. Breaking the altar hadn't ended the bargain. It had woken the thing the bargain was meant to keep asleep. The sleeper in the pines. The ground shook beneath Julia's boots, a deep, rolling tremor that rattled her teeth. Tom stumbled beside her, clutching her arm as the trees around them groaned like living things. Somewhere far off, but getting closer, came a sound like a massive heartbeat. Slow, relentless. They burst into another clearing, but it wasn't the one with the chairs. This one was much larger, the pines forming a perfect circle around a massive hollow in the earth. Roots as thick as tree trunks hung over the rim, curling downward like claws. From the darkness below came a low, guttural exhale, as if something in the pit had just drawn its first breath in decades. Tom's grip on her arm tightened. "What is that?" Before Julia could answer, a voice rose from the tree line behind them. The hooded figure, but different now, strained, almost reverent. "The harrow debt is broken," he intoned. "The sleeper wakes." Julia peered over the edge of the hollow. At first, all she saw was darkness, then movement. Massive coils, pale as bone, shifted slowly below. The heartbeat grew louder, and a smell hit her. Damp earth mixed with the sharp tang of decay. The thing moved again, and she caught sight of something impossibly large. An eye, half-lidded, glowing faintly with a sickly yellow light. It fixed on her, and every instinct screamed that this was not an animal. It was older, smarter. Walter's voice from the Historical Society came back to her. A bargain with the thing that lived in the forest. This was it. The reason for the ledger. The reason for the disappearances. The hooded figure stepped closer to the edge, raising his hands as if an offering. It must feed, he said, or we'll walk beyond the trees. Julia realized then that the mill, the chairs, even the figure himself, they were not the real threat. They were just the tools to keep this imprisoned. The bargain was never about sacrifice for the town's sake. It was about keeping the sleeper from leaving the woods and taking whatever it wanted. The ground split with a sharp crack, roots tearing free like writhing snakes. The pit was widening, the thing inside rising. And Julia understood with sick certainty. The forest didn't want a choice anymore. It wanted them both. The choice that wasn't. The ground's tremors turned violent, knocking Julia and Tom to their knees. Dirt rained down from the roots overhead, and the smell from the pit thickened, choking the air. The sleeper was moving faster now, coils sliding upward in the dark. That sickly yellow, I fixed on them like it had been waiting centuries for this moment. Tom scrambled to his feet, panic in his voice. We have to run. Julia grabbed his arm. Where? You saw what happened before. The forest folds in on itself. It wants us here. The hooded figure stood unshaken at the edge of the pit, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. Run, and it will follow. Stay, and only one of you is taken. Defy it again, and the town will burn. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. Julia's mind raced. She could see the layout of Harper Falls in her head. Main Street, the diner, the mill, and the small houses where people were likely sleeping right now, completely unaware of the nightmare under their feet. If the sleeper left the forest, the pack's century-old boundaries would mean nothing. She looked at Tom. His eyes were wild, but there was something else there too, guilt. Julia, he said, voice shaking, I think it wanted me. I went into the woods 2 nights ago, before I disappeared. I thought I could find out what happened to Dad. I heard the knocking, I followed it, and it was like something pulled me here. Julia's stomach dropped. You offered yourself? I didn't know what it was, he snapped, his voice breaking. But when I saw what was in the clearing, I ran. I think that's why it's after both of us now. The sleeper's coils rose higher, the yellow eye widening. The heartbeat in the earth was now a pounding drum. The hooded figure turned to her. It will not wait much longer. Decide. Julia's hands curled into fists. The choice wasn't between her life and Tom's anymore. It was between their lives and the entire town. If she could distract the sleeper long enough, maybe Tom could make it out and warn someone, or find a way to end this forever. She turned to him. When I say go, you run. No matter what you hear. Don't look back. His face twisted with protest. Julia, no. The ground split wider. A pale, scaled limb the size of a tree, trunk slammed into the earth beside them, sending up a spray of dirt and rock. Julia took a step toward the pit. Go! Facing the sleeper. Julia didn't wait to see if Tom obeyed. She ran straight toward the pit, the cold air slicing her lungs, the forest's low hum swelling into a deafening roar. The hooded figure didn't try to stop her. He simply stepped back, as if curious to see how she would die. The rim of the hollow crumbled under her boots, and she dropped to her knees, peering into the churning dark. The sleeper's bulk shifted below, a massive, serpentine form coiled like an ancient knot, scales slick and glistening as though wet with rain that hadn't fallen in centuries. The yellow eye she'd seen before was fully open now, its slit pupil tracking her with alien precision. Julia! Tom's voice was faint behind her, and she risked a glance. He was still there, frozen, torn between running and staying. The ground shook again as the sleeper's head rose from the pit. Impossibly huge, its features wrong in ways her mind couldn't fully grasp. Its mouth was not just a maw, but a gaping wound lined with teeth like shards of bone, opening and closing in slow, deliberate motions. The smell of rot hit her, sharp enough to sting her eyes. And then it spoke. Not in words her ears could hear, but in her head, a voice like cracking ice under deep water. A debt unpaid, a bargain broken. 1 for 1. Her knees nearly buckled under the pressure of it, but she forced herself to speak aloud. The bargain was a lie. You don't keep the town safe, you keep it afraid. The voice pressed harder, squeezing into her thoughts. Fear feeds. Blood binds. You will choose, or all will be taken. Her gaze darted to the altar, still visible at the far edge of the clearing. An idea sparked, reckless, impossible, but the only one she had. The pact was bound through ritual. Maybe breaking that same ritual in reverse could end it. She reached down, scooping a jagged rock from the ground, and sliced her palm open. Blood welled instantly, hot against the freezing air. She held it over the pit, letting drops fall toward the sleeper. The forest reacted violently. The trees groaned and bent inward, the wind shrieking through the branches. The hooded figure shouted something in a language she didn't understand, his voice suddenly desperate. The sleeper's head reared back, the voice in her skull a roar now. "You would bind yourself in his place?" "No," she said through clenched teeth. "I would end you." With her uninjured hand, she reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out the tarnished brass compass Walter had given her. She didn't know how she knew. Maybe the sleeper's voice was giving her the truth without meaning to. But she understood now that the compass wasn't just a guide. Its spinning needle had always pointed toward the heart of the pact. And now, she held it over the pit and let it fall. The instant the compass vanished into the darkness below, the forest screamed. The hum became a jagged, tearing sound, like the air itself splitting apart. The sleeper recoiled, its coils thrashing, slamming into the walls of the hollow. Chunks of earth gave way, roots snapping like dry bones. Julia staggered back from the edge, barely keeping her balance. "Tom," she shouted. "Run!" This time he moved. She could hear him crashing through the underbrush, but she didn't follow. Not yet. She kept her eyes on the pit, where the sleeper's form began to sink back into the earth, its glowing eye dimming. But before it vanished completely, the voice returned, softer now, almost amused. "The pact is broken, but the hunger remains. You have freed me." The ground sealed over with a shudder, leaving only silence and the faint echo of that voice in her mind. Aftermath in the pines. Julia didn't move for several seconds after the ground sealed shut. The forest was utterly still, the oppressive hum gone, replaced by a silence so deep it felt wrong. The trees no longer leaned inward. They stood rigid, almost wary. She staggered back from the pit, her legs trembling, and turned toward the path Tom had taken. Branches whipped against her face as she pushed through the undergrowth, her bloodied palm leaving streaks on the bark. "Tom!" she called, her voice raw. No answer. Panic surged hot in her chest. She pushed harder, breaking through into a narrow deer trail, and finally saw him, crouched behind a fallen log, his breath coming in sharp, shallow bursts. When he spotted her, he stood, relief flooding his face. "You're alive?" he said, almost in disbelief. "Barely." Julia grabbed his shoulders, scanning him for injuries. "We have to get out of here. Now." They moved quickly, following the faint glow of her phone's flashlight through the maze of pines. The forest felt different, no longer guiding them in circles. But it didn't feel safe either. Every gust of wind carried the whisper of movement, as if something was pacing them just beyond the edge of the light. "Julia," Tom's voice was low. "Back at the pit. I heard it too. In my head. It told me it's free now." She didn't look at him. "I know." When they finally broke through the tree line, the lights of Harper Falls twinkled faintly in the distance. Julia had never been so relieved to see them, but the feeling didn't last. Something about the town looked wrong. As they drew closer, she saw why. The streets were empty, but not in the way they had been before. Doors hung open. Porch lights flickered. A bicycle lay on its side in the middle of the road, one was slowly spinning. They passed the diner. The front window was shattered, the chairs inside overturned. Plates lay smashed on the floor. No bodies, but no people either. Walter's Historical Society building was dark, the door ajar. Julia hesitated, then stepped inside. The smell of dust and paper was the same, but the air was colder. On the counter lay the ledger she had brought earlier, but every name had been crossed out, replaced with a single phrase scrawled across the pages in black ink. "No more debt. All are due." Julia's stomach dropped. She turned to Tom, her voice barely a whisper. "It's not bound to the woods anymore." Somewhere behind them, down Main Street, came the faint but unmistakable sound of knocking. Not steady this time, fast. Urgent, and getting closer. When the woods walk. The knocking echoed down Main Street, bouncing between the brick storefronts. It was unlike the slow, ritualistic sound Julia had heard in the woods. This was frantic, uneven, like a predator's claws skittering across the pavement. She and Tom froze in the middle of the street, every instinct screaming at them to get inside. But where? Every building they passed looked abandoned or already breached. Then, from the shadows near the post office, something moved. At first, Julia thought it was a man, tall, wrapped in something dark. But then the light from a flickering street lamp hit it, and she saw the wrongness in its shape. Its limbs were too long, its joints bending in ways that made her stomach twist. Its head cocked at a sharp angle, as if listening to something only it could hear. The knocking stopped. It turned toward them. Even from that distance, Julia could see its face, or what was left of it. The skin was pale, stretched thin, the mouth far too wide, the teeth not human. And in its eyes, that same faint yellow glow she had seen in the sleepers. Tom whispered, "Julia, run." They bolted, sprinting past the darkened windows, the thing's footsteps breaking into a disturbing, loping rhythm behind them. The sound wasn't like running. It was like something dragging itself forward fast, scraping claws across asphalt. Julia spotted the side alley by Harper's Diner and yanked Tom toward it. They tore around the corner, pressing themselves into the narrow gap between two buildings. The thing passed the alley's mouth without slowing, the shadow of its elongated form sliding across the wall like a living stain. They waited until the sound faded before moving again, keeping low. "We need weapons," Julia said, her voice sharp and quiet. "Something that can hurt it." Tom shook his head. "We saw what it is in the woods. I don't think bullets are going to." A sudden crash cut him off, glass shattering somewhere nearby, followed by a scream. A woman's scream. Julia's heart lurched. Someone still here. They ran toward the sound, finding themselves outside the old hardware store. The front window had been blown inward, shards glittering on the floor. Inside, a middle-aged woman clutched a baseball bat, her eyes wide with terror. "It's in here," she shouted when she saw them. Julia barely had time to register her words before something massive slammed into the shelves at the back of the store, sending tools and cans flying. The yellow glow flared in the darkness. Teeth in the dark. The yellow glow flared again, spilling out from between the toppled shelves at the back of the store. Julia grabbed a hammer from the nearest display, her knuckles white around the handle. Tom ducked behind the counter, scanning frantically for anything heavier, and the woman with the bat planted her feet near the doorway, her breathing sharp and uneven. The thing moved between the aisles. They could hear it more than see it. A wet scrape against the linoleum, the occasional metallic clang as its claws brushed against scattered tools. "Keep the light on it," Julia whispered to Tom. He flicked on his phone flashlight and aimed it down the center aisle. The beam caught the creature mid-step, its limbs spider-like, its shoulders nearly scraping the shelves, the wide mouth splitting open farther than human jaws should. Inside was a black pit lined with rows of needle teeth. It didn't flinch at the light. Instead, it let out a low, rumbling sound. Not a growl, but something closer to the hum they'd heard in the forest. Then it lunged. Julia swung the hammer, the blow glancing off the side of its head with a sickening crack. It staggered, but only for a second before sweeping a clawed arm toward her. She ducked, the claws shredding through the pegboard wall like paper. The woman with the bat stepped in, slamming it into the creature's ribs. This time, the hit drew a reaction, a sharp, high-pitched screech that made Julia's teeth ache. Tom, thinking fast, grabbed a can of industrial-strength sealant foam from the counter and sprayed it directly into the creature's face. Thick white foam coated its eyes and mouth, and it reeled back, thrashing violently. "Go! Out the back!" Julia shouted. They bolted toward the stockroom, shelves crashing behind them as the thing tore through the aisles. The back door was padlocked, but Julia swung the hammer with everything she had, splintering the latch. They spilled out into the alley just as the creature slammed into the doorframe, snapping it clean off the hinges. For a moment, it crouched there in the doorway, the foam still clinging to its face, the yellow glow burning through it like embers under ash. It didn't follow immediately. Instead, it tilted its head, almost curious, before retreating into the darkness of the store. They didn't wait to see why. They ran until Main Street opened up ahead, lungs burning, hearts hammering. The woman leaned against a lamppost, gasping for breath. "That thing, it's not alone," she said, her voice shaking. "I saw another one in the alley before you came in." Julia and Tom locked eyes. If the sleeper could make more than one body for itself, the whole town might already be swarming with them. The wrong way out. The cold October wind cut down Main Street, carrying the faint metallic tang that Julia now recognized all too well, the smell of the sleeper's presence. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see the yellow glow again, but the street behind them was empty. Too empty. The woman wiped a trembling hand across her face. "My name's Carla," she said between breaths. "I live 2 streets over. I thought I was the last one here." "No one else is answering," Julia said. "We need somewhere solid. Doors we can bolt. Windows we can cover." Tom pointed toward the squat, brick shape of the old fire station at the far end of town. "Thick walls. Basement. It's our best shot." They started toward it, moving fast, but not running. Every sound seemed to travel in the stillness. Somewhere far to the east, metal scraped against concrete, followed by a thud heavy enough to rattle the glass in a nearby shop front. As they passed an alley, Carla stiffened. "Did you hear that?" Julia did, a faint clicking like claws tapping against the asphalt, keeping pace with them from inside the shadows. She tightened her grip on the hammer. The clicking grew louder, then stopped. A yellow glow flared briefly deep in the alley before vanishing. "Keep moving," Julia whispered. They cut across Maple Street, closing the gap to the fire station. That's when Julia noticed something wrong. Every route they took seemed strangely clear. No overturned cars. No debris. No sign of the creatures at all. It was like the streets had been cleared for them. Her stomach tightened. "We're not escaping. We're being guided." Tom looked around sharply. Guided where? A sound rolled down the street behind them. A deep, echoing knock that wasn't frantic this time. It was steady. Deliberate. Knock, knock, knock. It came from multiple directions now, bouncing off the buildings until Julia couldn't tell where it started. She realized the fire station's red doors loomed directly ahead, standing open just enough to show darkness inside. Carla took a step toward it, but Julia grabbed her arm. "Wait." Too late. From the shadows inside the fire station, 2 yellow eyes blinked open, then 2 more, then 4. The knock came again, deafening now, and the 3 of them turned just in time to see shapes pouring into the street behind them. Tall, jointed wrong, their pale faces stretching wide in hunger. They weren't chasing. They were closing the circle. The last door. The creatures closed in slowly, their movements deliberate, as if they knew Julia, Tom, and Carla had nowhere left to go. The fire station loomed behind them, its red doors gaping like a mouth waiting to swallow them whole. The yellow eyes multiplied in the darkness inside, a half circle of them, unblinking. The steady knock echoed from within, blending with the sound of the creature's claws scraping the pavement outside. "They want us in there," Julia said, her voice tight. Carla's face was pale. "Then we don't go in." But the street behind them was gone, swallowed by moving shadows. The pale, jointed forms blocked every escape route, their teeth bared in 2 wide grins. The air grew heavier, the faint hum of the woods returning, though they were far from the tree-line. Tom's voice was a whisper. "Julia, it's the same feeling as the pit." Julia understood. This wasn't just an ambush. The sleeper had brought its heart here. The fire station wasn't a trap in the usual sense. It was an altar. A shape shifted inside, taller than the rest, its hood brushing the top of the doorway. She knew that stance, that stillness. The hooded figure from the forest stepped forward, his voice rolling out like the wind before a storm. "You broke the bargain," he said. "Now there are no rules. Only hunger." The creatures began to close the gap, their claws clicking in perfect unison. Julia tightened her grip on the hammer, though she knew it was useless. "Why keep us alive?" she demanded. The hooded figure tilted his head. "You will carry it." Before she could ask what he meant, the creatures surged forward. Cold hands gripped her arms, her shoulders, pulling her toward the open doors. She fought, twisting, kicking, but their strength was unnatural, unyielding. She caught a glimpse of Tom and Carla being dragged beside her, their faces masks of terror. Inside, the fire station was dark except for the center, where deep fissures split the concrete floor, pulsing faintly with that sickly yellow light. The hum grew into a roar. The air vibrated. Julia felt it in her teeth, in her bones. As they were forced to their knees at the edge of the fissure, the hooded figure stepped behind her, placing one cold hand on the back of her neck. "Your blood woke it," he murmured. "Now it will live in you." Something rose from the crack. Not the massive coils from the forest, but a wisp of black smoke shot through with yellow fire. It twisted like a living thing, searching. Julia tried to pull away, but the grip on her neck was iron. The smoke struck, flooding into her mouth, her nose, her eyes. The world went white, then black. When she opened her eyes again, she was standing in the middle of Main Street. The fire station was gone. The creatures were gone. Tom and Carla were nowhere in sight. The town looked normal. Lights glowed in the windows. People walked along the sidewalks, smiling as if nothing had happened. But as they passed her, each one glanced at her eyes, and in their reflections she saw it. The faint yellow glow burning deep inside her own. Somewhere in her mind, the sleeper's voice whispered, almost gently, "We are free." Julia smiled without meaning to, and began to walk. The midnight encounter. It was the middle of the night. In the small American town of Willow Creek,